remember so distinctly. I'm pretty sure I still have the paperwork somewhere, but I had this kid in grade 6 who had just been kind of like tangentially connected to the group come in the next week to our next practice with a 6-page document that he had put together all on his own with complete analysis. He went through everything you could possibly imagine about these characters, and he had typed it up all himself. So he had done the research. He had demonstrated research skills, critical thinking, his ability to communicate all of these our ideas in very articulate ways, and even the extension into fan art. He attached a page with some fan art he had drawn of the character that he had selected, Cloud, in case you were wondering, and it was really incredible to see that without asking him to do that, he was willing to put in all of this work and hit so many curricular outcomes all out of self motivation. And that was just the start.
Melissa Burns is the founder of Esports Canada, and as you hear in that short anecdote, she is very, very passionate and has so many wonderful stories and examples and insights around the impact of esports. For those of you who may or not been following along, esports is certainly a burgeoning and emerging and a here to stay, not just technology, but experience and opportunity for young people. And we need people like Melissa to help lead the way. So this interview and this podcast is brought to you by our sponsors at Advanced Learning Partnerships. And we are on a mission to interview leadership across Canada, sharing these kinds of stories and more. And this is another episode, which I hope you'll find informative. If you know a lot about esports, I think you'll be nodding along and saying, yeah, I get that. And if you're new to esports, I really, really encourage you to listen, because you're just going to hear so much around the value, the impact, and just the way in which esports is not this extraneous activity that sits outside the norm, but really has high potential as a core part of the learning experiences of our young people. So enjoy my conversation with Melissa Burns. Going. Well, first of all, thank you for doing this. I know we have not really formally met, and I know you through some other people. I know you through Katina a little bit, Papalkas from Dell. Her and I work closely together, and so that's kind of my connection to you. And then sort of just observing, we're working very closely with Girls of Game and then esports as well. So you definitely come up as definitely a leader in this, particularly in Canada. So anyways, it's nice to meet you. And you're in Winnipeg?
Yes, yeah, I'm in Winnipeg. I mean, technically, I live in a small town just outside of Winnipeg, like a little farming community about 20 minutes south, but yeah, I work in Winnipeg.
Okay. I grew up in Morden, Manitoba,
Oh,
just south. Yes, that's my hometown. So I
okay. So
am
then you
now
may have,
have been.
oh, I was just going to say, maybe you've heard of my town. I'm in Niverville.
I've heard of Niverville. Yes, I have.
Uh,
Uh, and you're teaching in that. Which school district do you teach at?
the Louis School Division.
Okay. So then, are you in the city then for teaching?
Yeah, so I commute into the city to teach. I'm actually not in a classroom anymore. I'm a school and classroom support team member. So I do instructional support and work with teachers to implement different kinds of progressive pedagogy with a special focus on
Cool.
integration and technology.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Well, let's again. It's later in the day for all of us. I don't want to keep you too long, but I hope this is the first of maybe many conversations. But anyway, let's get rolling here. So I'm always curious, what is your entry point into esports? How did you find esports, or how did esports find you?
Um, a number of different ways. I've been a gamer my whole life. I've never not gamed. And so I've always had an interest in it in terms of video gaming. But esports specifically actually happened during my first career. So prior to being an educator, I was working professionally in musical theater. And while I was on the road, one of the ways that I stayed in contact with my then best friend and currently husband was that we would play League of Legends. You have to realize that this was the day and age before Netflix was around, so you couldn't watch something together. We kind of would pirate movies and go 3, 2, 1, play. Well, if we wanted to watch a movie and hope that we had one that synced up properly. But something that we could do together was play League of Legends. And so that was kind of my entry point into competitive video games. And around that same time, this was around, I'm dating myself, but this was like season one, season two of League of Legends, like the LCS. And professional play. And so we would also play sort of like a fantasy football league, pick'ems. And so I had my roster that I'd make of all of my favorite players from the North American League, and we would play that way. And then when I found myself in teaching, I was a high school specialist, but found myself on a permanent contract in a K-8 building and felt a little bit like a fish out of water. And so I approached the principal and said, um, would it be okay if I started an esports team with the junior high students? And of course, they had no idea what that was, but they said, if you can find the gear, go for it. And
So, and what year is this?
that would have
What
been
year was
2000,
that?
that would have been 2016.
Yeah, that's pretty early.
Yeah. And my husband had been coaching at a high school since 2012, League of Legends. So I'd been exposed to it in the school system setting for a long time. But that's really where I got my start in really digging into it, and everything snowballed pretty quick after that.
So yeah, and again, that's 2016. That's now 7 years ago. But in esports terms, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's the especially as we're talking about schools. I mean, admittedly, I mean I don't know esports even on my radar. Not that I'm a particular gamer, but quite current as in terms of technology and trends. It's only been on my radar. It feels like maybe 5 years. So you were definitely starting this early. So to go back to that 2016, like what did it look like to start an esports club back then, perhaps even versus what it can or it does look like today?
Yeah. It was the whole journey itself has been really interesting to watch it evolve and unfold, because initially it was kind of a twofold um, strategy for myself as a new teacher in that school. I wanted to feel like I had something to contribute, but also that at the time I was working as a music specialist, and knowing that relationships are paramount to classroom management and just for success in education in general. Having students in your classroom for 30 minutes like 3 times every 6 days is not very conducive to that. So I wanted to find a way to really connect with them. And so at the time, especially junior high, nobody was doing esports in junior highs. If you heard about it, it was in high schools. And there happened to be a few high schools around in the Louis Riel school division that were putting on LAN tournaments for Super Smash Bros. At the time. And so once I had my gear and had my little ragtag crew of students who wanted to participate, we had in that first year out of the I would have said 45 students that were in grade 7, 8. I had 16 that were part of the Smash team, and I was very realistic with them. I said, "Look, we're going into a tournament full of high school students. They've had years and years of gaming experience on you, but that doesn't mean that you can't win." And so then we went into it very strategically in terms of looking for the fact that while the other competitors would have a better technical approach to the game just because of time and experience with the game, that if my students, my junior high students in grade 7 8, came to it with a defensive positioning and looked for opportunities to capitalize on mistakes, that they could come out on top. They're like, okay, yeah. And so we started playing around with that strategy, and we went to our first LAN tournament, and we're very much overlooked by everybody. Nobody really took this little group of grade 7 8 kids seriously, especially up against all these grade 11 and 12s who've been doing this for a lot longer. And we ended up winning B-side. And that moment of our first ever experience in competition, and they realized that they were able to win, and not even just win, it was that experience of competing in something that they loved was really, really pivotal. But when we came back, something that was really interesting was that we started to realize that it wasn't necessarily about the winning, it was all these different extensions that came out of it. And as we dug into it more, we had all these natural and authentic conversations about different kinds of STEM technology. And we had all these different kinds of conversations about digital citizenship and about digital literacy. And it was really incredible to see all of these conversations come so naturally out of these situations, and the learning was so deep and rich. And so I would give them these optional assignments, so to speak, where I would say pick your main, which is a very common technique in especially in fighting games. You pick a main character. Usually you'll have two that you'll go through, and I want you to identify what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what is their skill set, who do they pair well against, which stages do they perform best on. And I remember so distinctly, I'm pretty sure I still have the paperwork somewhere, but I had this kid in grade 6 who had just been kind of like tangentially connected to the group come in the next week to our next practice with a 6-page document that he had put together all on his own with complete analysis. He went through everything you could possibly imagine about these characters, and he had typed it up all himself. So he had done the research. He had demonstrated research skills, critical thinking, his ability to communicate all of these our ideas in very articulate ways, and even the extension into fan art. He attached a page with some fan art he had drawn of the character that he had selected, Cloud, in case you were wondering. And it was really incredible to see that without asking him to do that, he was willing to put in all of this work and hit so many curricular outcomes, all out of self motivation. And that was just the start. There were so many more rich learning experiences that came out of it, and it allowed me to become a lot more intentional in how I approached the entire process as well, so that we could really capitalize on those opportunities, not only to become better players in the various games, but also to really dig into some rich learning opportunities for my students.
Well, I mean, that's powerful. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about, my experience when I taught middle school and was involved in extracurricular coaching with basketball. And, I think anybody that's done any extracurricular, whether it's in the arts or sports or whatever, is, to your point, it's a way to connect kids in a different way and so forth. But as you're speaking, I guess the thing that I hadn't considered is the way in which you and I think it's a credit to the way you maybe frame things, but maybe it's a natural outcome of all esports is those connections back to the curricular things, right? The fact that these are kids that, and I know that people looking on the outside sometimes have a difficult time understanding the relevance and the connections that are happening in an esports context. But that's a really powerful idea that this is a gateway to deeper learning and again just the ways in which you know all of these kinds of industries have so many breakout professions and careers that come with this, that besides just the actual playing of the games. But one question I was like, I wonder about, and I think I love you speak the dynamics of it. Like, so you and I are both involved in a Girls Who Game idea, which is something that Dell has brought forward to really address the fact that women, young girls in particular, are often on the margins of esports. And as this becomes a burgeoning industry and opportunity, we want to figure out ways to give them a chance. But you started with boys, and there's also a, obviously, especially when we think about middle school and even elementary, like boys often they struggle with learning and aren't engaged in school in the way sometimes that girls are. So maybe talk a little bit about the dynamics of sort of the all boys component of it, as well as an all girls component, and why those are uh, different approaches, and yet achieve some really interesting outcomes.
hmm and this is definitely one that has been a passion point for me, knowing that I come to this uh, sort of world of esports, at least esports in education, as a bit of an outlier myself, where I don't fit the typical mold of what you'd assume a gamer is or who they are. And something that is really powerful for educators, especially established educators, to really understand is that esports isn't just boys, and it isn't just a specific demographic of our boys either. Uh, there was a study that Pew had put out with some statistics, and at this point, it's old data. Like I think it was published in probably 2019, but they had shown that in the United States, which is where they had collected their data, 97% of students between the ages of 13 and 18 were playing video games regularly, meaning a minimum of 2 hours a day. That's all students. That's not specific to any gender. That's not specific. That was all students. And something that makes esports specifically such an incredible opportunity for educators to really harness is that it does capture uh, students who normally wouldn't interact, because while we usually associate esports teams and clubs as something that will attract students that don't generally participate in extracurricular activities, whether it's music or theater or sports, it definitely does hit that. But this is one of those few opportunities where your sports kids are sharing an interest and a passion and a high level skill with those other kids that are not involved in sports
Mm-hmm.
typically. And with girls in particular, it's interesting because while I reference some of the boys that I worked with in that first year, my first year there were 16 kids in total. Two of them were girls. And in my second year, I ran the same kind of thing where we met as a club twice a week. And it was a co ed experience. I myself am a visible female presence in that club. I had 20 students, two were girls. The year after that, my third year of the program, I decided to try something different because I was aware of some of this data. And I knew from speaking to my classes that there were a lot of girls that were gaming, and I didn't realize how many. But I offered one day as co ed and one day as girls only. And I had more girls than boys. And it was absolutely incredible to see that opportunity appear for them, because it wasn't that they were disinterested. It was that the environment we had created
Right.
for them, even in a perceivably safe space at school, with me as a female presence leading it, was still not perceived as a place where they felt comfortable to come and maybe develop their skills. And so I had to change that. Really shifted the way that I viewed the spaces that I was creating for my students, because we talk a lot about how if a student's not performing or not meeting standards or finding success, you don't change the student, you change the environment. And so that's what I realized in that moment I needed to do, was I needed to change that environment. And so it didn't mean that I took away from those co-ed experiences and opportunities. And throughout the year, as they gained more confidence in those girls only spaces that they perceived as being more safe, more of them were showing up for both practices. So then they were actually getting even more benefit out of it. And something that's really interesting to see at the professional level is that, unlike traditional sports, there really aren't um, any barriers that should limit women from competing at the same level as men that you would see in traditional sports based on physiology. Uh, but there's a massive gap in terms of actual representation, in terms of women that are able to compete at the highest levels along with the men. And so when we look at that, we have to identify what is causing this. What is that piece that is holding them back from being able to compete and develop to be at those highest levels? And a lot of it has to do with the environment. I have friends of mine who play very high competitive levels, and if they are heard in comms with a female voice, one of them will say, like, the first question they get is, "Are you a squeaker?" Meaning like a young prepubescent boy. And as soon as they find out you're female, they do treat you differently. The language changes, the opportunities in game change. It's a very different experience. And so while there's the approach for the current generation that should be playing at those high levels, what we can do to support them is to amplify their voices, highlight the work they're doing, give them opportunities to be as successful as possible. We have the opportunity in education to change the system so that we don't have to have those kinds of outcomes at the higher levels. Because what we do is we can work on developing those girls at a young age, but also intentionally working with our young boys to help them identify what the issues are and when they are contributing to problems.
Wow, I mean, you're just sharing so many amazing insights and truths, and the purpose for what you're doing is well well beyond playing any kind of League of Legends or any other kind of game. Maybe just talk to me a little bit about and you probably described it a little bit, but so there you were in 2016, you started this sort of burgeoning idea of a club. Where are we now in 2023, even in maybe even just talking about what you're involved with in your school district?
Hmm. So it's exploded like crazy. And it's really exciting to see all the stuff that is happening, because from that tiny little club that I had started, that grew into this idea of creating a provincial organization. And so we had the Manitoba Middle Years Esport Association, which became this other thing, so that now we have our high school program and our middle school program amalgamated this past summer. So we are the Manitoba School Esport Association. But prior to the pandemic, something that's really interesting about esports is that, unlike traditional sports, it's not limited by geographical location. And so I started having my students and the other teams from Manitoba compete with schools internationally and across the country. And I started reaching out and was able to put together a small group of educators from across the country and started a program called Esports Canada. And so Esports Canada was founded by Canadian educators for Canadian students. And we're all volunteers. And we had this dream of building a program where educators could share resources, support curriculum development, and also have competition, and whether it's friendly or competitive competitions for our students across the country to really develop their digital citizenship. And that, during the pandemic, became such a beautiful outlet for so many students, and we saw a lot of growth. But we also, at the same time, saw a lot of for-profit American companies coming into the Canadian education space at that time. And we knew that we had to offer something very different for this to be lasting and sustainable. And so staying true to this small grassroots approach to growth, where we were really focused on what is the purpose of what we are doing and how does it support students, and really keeping the students at the center of everything that we were doing, but then also providing resources for teachers became a big focus for us. But it also managed to get a lot of attention from folks outside of just the K-12 space. And so just last year, we were approached by folks in industry, by folks from government, and different folks from the universities. And so in the span of 1 year, we've expanded from being just a small national federally registered national organization for esports in schools to now having three major branches. So our organization has our K to 12 space, which is still completely run by educators from across the country. And we're currently in the process of developing more provincial organizations. So we're onboarding all of Western Canada right now. So Manitoba has been established the longest. Ontario was established last year, and we've got onboarding process happening in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC at the moment. And we're trying to start an activation in Nova Scotia in partnership with St. Mary's University. But we also have our post-secondary, Esports Canada post-secondary, which is where the home for all Canadian colleges and universities. And that program, it is home to Canadian Power Rankings, where we can start to see the statistics and who is the real movers and shakers in Canada in that university space, in terms of competition, but also programs. Because if you pay attention to our social channels, you'll see lots of scholarships posting right about now. So lots of opportunities for students to get those scholarships to various post-secondary institutions across the country. And then our third branch is our amateur to professional competition. And so we are the Canadian chapter of the International Esport Federation. So we are the governing body for sanctioned national events, where we put together Team Canada to compete internationally. So just this past December, we were able to send our first Team Canada delegation out to Bali, Indonesia for the World Esports Championships, and we competed in Tekken. Tekken 7's a fighting game, and ended up 13th overall. And there were 106 countries competing. So it was really exciting.
Well, I mean, we're talking. Yeah, you've definitely identified the explosion, and when you talked about the fact that early on you had American companies wanting to be a part of it, it's the good and the bad, right? With any kind of growth, is that there's money involved, right? And with esports, there's big money involved, and so I guess that comes with lots of opportunity. But also probably some challenges that have to be addressed, and everybody's got to be concerned of it. But this goes back to what you talked about before, about like that's the learning. Let's unpack this. Let's understanding what's happening for those kids. So where do you see, or I don't know if I'm asking you to predict, or at least maybe optimistically looking at the future of esports, whatever, 3 to 5 years, not that that's anybody that could truly predict it, but what do you think the future of esports is, at least in the short term?
I see a lot of growth and a lot more acceptance. We're seeing lots of schools across the country starting to ask questions about not just what is it, but how do we do it? And so we're in the process right now of a lot of capacity building amongst educational leaders, and looking for people to step up and work alongside some of the educators who have been in this space and have been championing this for a long time now, to really be able to sustainably grow this entire experience for our students. We're looking for partners in departments of education and universities, especially teachers colleges across the country, to really put together curriculum documents and supporting modules that educators can use to really utilize this, because one of the things that we're seeing out of esports, and I think that this is what's really going to draw a lot of educators into this space, is that we're based on the recent statistics, they're showing that over 400 million jobs are going to be automated before the end of the decade. And as that change happens, and even as we start to even just feel some of the early tremors of the impact of AI technology, that our students are going to need different skills moving forward, and they need to really develop with intentionality digital literacy. And that needs to be something that is taken very seriously, especially from a socioeconomic perspective. And so esports provide students and schools the opportunity to really lean into what kinds of skills they're going to need, regardless of what career they end up choosing in the future, because this is about developing those global competencies. It's about the communication, the collaboration, the critical thinking, but it also gets them to really look at how do we harness technology to be able to utilize it to work for from wherever we are. So one of the things that I'm doing here in Manitoba in particular is I'm trying to connect as much as possible with our northern communities. We have a program in a lot of our reserve communities right now as well, where we're using esports to help them develop digital literacy skills, so that way they can have those higher paying jobs but stay right there in their home communities. They don't have to leave their home community to have a high paying job. They can work from where they are, continue to contribute to their local economy, and really find success in that space without having to give up where they are and the family and the relationships that they have in that space. And so I think that that's something that is going to be really important for educators to take seriously. But it's also something that we have to start at younger and younger ages, because one of my major concerns when I look at this is that oftentimes schools are prioritizing regular access to technology for middle school and high school students. But by the time that you get to middle school and high school, the skill gap between those in socioeconomically more challenging situations, who don't have regular access to technology at home, have such a gap in their skills that they're constantly playing catch up to all the kids that had regular access to this. And so it becomes an equity piece where we really need to prioritize getting this technology into their hands and intentionally teaching them how to use it in fun and engaging ways, so that they really have their best possible chance at a very changing world and economy.
Wow, you've again just the insights you have for the future is, and I think just hitting on so many things that those aren't issues of equity and so forth and access. Those aren't brand new issues, but they're almost becoming. You'd think that we since we've had these conversations for 15, 20 years, you'd think we'd have resolved them by now. But they're it and that's just true. I mean, opportunities continue to expand, so the kids that are taking advantage of those are doing amazing things and are creating all kinds of opportunities, which is creating this major gap between those that don't. So this is exciting to think about, but the potential and the possibility of this for the future. I'm so glad I had a chance to hear from you and learn from you. Congratulations on all the stuff you've done. Just as I finish, maybe talk a little bit personally, like how are you still sort of, like, you talked about being a gamer. So what does gaming look like for you from a personal perspective?
For me right now, honestly, I don't have as much time as I want to game. My gaming primarily happens with my kids at this point. Um, so even like I don't even get to coach anymore very often, because I'm usually commissioning and running different things. So I don't even have that opportunity anymore. But I play a lot of Pokemon Unite with my kids, my own children, which is really fun. Yeah, so that's primarily my gaming at this point. Lots of watching and a little bit of gaming on the side.
Right. Well, that seems to be the path for a lot of sort of former athletes, as the as we'd say. So, um, I was going to ask you. I always ask my guests. Tell me something that you're reading of late that's perked your interest. It could be personal, it could be professional, whatever. You have time. I don't know if you have time to read, but anything you've been reading lately that's interesting.
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm driving because I have that commute from my town
Mm-hmm.
into the city. So definitely listening to some podcasts. And in terms of an actual book, we are reading Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets out loud with our kids. So that's been fun to
There
reread
you go.
and
Yeah, yeah.
experience through their eyes. And then just to stay on top of things in the business sense and helping me make those connections between what is happening at, like in the economy and in the world, the business world of esports. There's a podcast called The Business of Esports, and I really enjoy listening to that one because you're hearing all the latest developments, trends, all that kind of stuff that's happening in the business world. And then
Right.
I reflect back on that to see how does this impact our students, and how can we use these things to our advantage.
Well, you're definitely one of the most knowledgeable and leaders in esports, especially in Canada. So again, I'm sure you're going to be continue to be that go-to person. The last question is, so tell me an underrated, and I want to make sure you hear the word underrated,
Okay.
location or thing to do in Winnipeg. So if a person's coming to Winnipeg, what's a place you'd say, hey, you may not have heard of this, or this isn't something that a lot of people know about, but you should check
Hmm.
this out. Could be whatever restaurant, could be a site, anything. What would you choose?
Hmm. I mean, Winnipeg is low key really great for food. So if you're a foodie, there's so many great like underground kind of restaurants that you almost have to like hear about word of mouth, and like even some with like secret entrances. So I would say
Yes.
definitely the foodie locations are definitely worth checking
Okay.
out.
Give us a
And
secret entrance place that I could go next time in Winnipeg.
there's a really cool sushi place. The name escapes me, but it's in Osborne Village, and you actually have to go in through some apartment buildings into this like large atrium, and then down a set of stairs, and it's tucked away in the corner back there. So
So
I'll have to
it's
show
not a
you.
true speakeasy. It's not a true speakeasy, but it
There
has a speakeasy feel.
there is a speakeasy on River, I think River in Osborne. There is one there. I haven't been there myself, but I've heard about it, and you apparently have to have an invitation to actually even get in there.
Oh,
So I
okay.
haven't
Wow.
been.
Okay, you can't just show up.
Yeah.
Oh
And
well.
for something
Well,
super
thank you so
random,
much.
I'd go to the Golf
Okay.
Dome.
To the where? Sorry, the
The
golf dome.
Golf Dome.
Okay, sure. Indoor golf in wintertime. I'm up for it. I'm there.
Yeah,
I
random.
see it. I know where it is because I drive past it. It's on the south end of town, right?
Oh yeah, right. You
Yes.
would know what that is.
Yes. I would I knew it. I know what it is. A lot of people probably don't know that. I know what it is. So anyway,
Yeah.
good tip. Well, thank you, Melissa, for your time. I really appreciate this. This was super informative, and I hope we get the chance to chat again and work together maybe.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
All right.